I'm standing at Washington's Crossing in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. Behind me is the Delaware River, and right in this area is where Washington left in December of the Revolutionary War, 1776, to cross over and attack the British, but it turned out it was mostly German mercenaries that were guarding Trenton. Washington was wildly successful. He was far more successful than he probably deserved to be, and more successful than the British ever thought he would be. And he captured a number of British soldiers. And that's where the intersection of international human rights law occurred in the Revolutionary War. Because you see, the Revolutionary War was a very barbaric war. The British refused quarter, which means they refused to allow Americans to surrender. They would just kill them all. If they did happen to capture some American soldiers, they would put them in the hulls of ships that were anchored in New York Harbor under horrid conditions. And the sentiment of that is probably well summed up by a quote that I have from a British Marine, Captain John Bowater. He said, "The natives are such leveling, unbred, artful race of people that we cannot associate with them. Their words come up so slowly, I frequently long to shove a soup ladle down their throat. And I'm certain our troops will act with less humanity." So the captured Germans who were coming behind me after Washington's successful raid really didn't know what to expect other than how they had treated the Americans. They weren't expecting to be treated humanely, but the American leaders took a very different course than the British did. And the sentiment that the leaders of the revolution had is really best summed up by John Adams. And I'm going to read a lengthy quote from him, but listen to some of the principles that he mentions. "I, who am always made miserable by the misery of every sensible being, and am obliged to hear continual accounts of the barbarities, the cruel murders in cold blood, even the most torturing ways of starving and freezing committed by our enemies. These accounts for me are beyond description. I know of no policy, God is my witness, but this: piety, humanity, and honesty are the best policy. Blasphemy, cruelty, and villainy have prevailed and may again, but they won't prevail against America in this contest, because I find the more they are employed, the less they succeed." John Adams had a very good point, very thoughtful point in thinking about how these types of actions were perceived by the enemy. The more they were used, actually they motivated the Americans against the British. They didn't cow the Americans, and we'll see that as we look at different ways torture has been used to try to do things, to exert confessions from people. But way back in 1776, John Adams recognized that there were important distinctions that we'll see carried forward in the Lieber Code during the Civil War that recognize the humanity and dignity of every person.